Welcome, everyone, to the Over Under Movies podcast, the show where we take a prominent figure or franchise in the world of filmmaking and ask the simple question, are they overrated or are they underrated? My name is Dylan DeAndros. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host. He is the Samwise to my Frodo.
Mr. Frodo. Was that good?
Mr. Frodo.
I'll carry you.
Sam, the ring, it's so heavy. It's so heavy, Sam. We're talking about Lord of the Rings today, guys. Mr. Jason Gong.
Yes. Hi.
Welcome, Jason. I know you had a long day today at PAX Unplugged.
I'll be honest. I didn't go up there till 2 o'clock.
Jeez. That's rolling in, huh?
Yeah, I mean...
How late is it open at night? I don't even know.
The gaming place where you can, like, just sit and play board games is actually open till midnight.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, but the show floor closes at 6. So the idea is, like, you go there, you do your panels, you buy your board games, and then you can sit at the tables and play for 6 more hours.
Yeah, and so the Philadelphia Convention Center, which is enormous, so
yeah,
they got plenty of space, I'm sure.
It's nice, yeah. Yeah, it was quite fun, and then we just got some hot pot. And
did you buy any board games today? Or
I just bought a Lorcana deck, but I'll probably give that away as a gift.
I've seen some pictures of the Lorcana setups. I know they got a big presence there.
Dude, Lorcana is like one of the biggest things there. They've got like several banners as you enter the place. Like they're really trying to convert people into playing. And Lorcana's like a good game. I play it like 3 or 4 times a week, but it's not, it's just Magic, but with Disney. Yeah, I'm doing a bad job. We gotta get a sponsorship.
Everybody's trying to get into the card game business nowadays. I saw that the Witcher card game Gwent, they made a physical version. They made a physical version of that. And then the poker roguelike game that got nominated for Game of the Year, Balatro, that's also coming out with a physical card deck that they're selling that's in the style of the cards in the game, which is cool. So
that is cool. Yeah.
Anyway, today we're not talking about board games. We are talking about an actually very interesting movie to discuss because Lord of the Rings is one of my favorite film franchises of all time. I know that...
You have a tattoo.
I do have a tattoo of Lord of the Rings. I have the ring insignia on my arm here. I know that some people cheat and they say that the 3 Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings films are really just one movie split into 3 parts. If you follow that notion, I would say that it's probably my favorite film of all time. If you count those 3 films as one movie.
One film? Okay.
I think it's about as near flawless as you can get when it comes to high fantasy film adaptation like that.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, the Peter Jackson films were not the first attempt at adapting Tolkien's books into film. Now, it was not live action per se. Actually, that's up for debate. We'll talk about that throughout the pod today. But there was an attempt in 1978 to make a film called The Lord of the Rings, and it is called a, quote, animated picture. It's about as animated, I would say, as, like, Who Framed Roger Rabbit is animated.
No, it's quite a bit more animated than that, but I see what you're getting at.
Or Tron. It's a movie that is clearly limited by budget as well as technological advancement of 1978. So they're having to do some problem solving in making this. And for anybody who hasn't seen this one, because I'm sure a lot of people haven't seen it, the 1978 Lord of the Rings basically is Fellowship and Two Towers put into one movie, and it's like 2 hours and 10 minutes long. So if you're doing the math, they cut down a lot of stuff that are in the Peter Jackson films. Though I will say, and maybe you could back me up on this, because neither of us had seen this before. We watched this a couple days ago.
That's right.
I found it kind of interesting how much in this movie is also in the Peter Jackson movies. It's almost, I know Peter Jackson took a lot of inspiration from this film when making his, but I feel like you could just do like side-by-sides and it would be like kind of jarring how much is similar between these films. I know they're adapting the same books, but the books are like loaded with stuff that are still not in either of these movies.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely scenes that are directly lifted from this in the Peter Jackson films. So the scene where they're like hiding from the ring wraiths is the most famous direct, like, because it's written differently in the books, but the way that this movie did it, they choose to do it the same way in the Peter Jackson films. That's the one that I read about. But yeah, it's definitely a huge influence on those films. The things they chose to adapt were very similar. Changes they made from the books seem similar. I mean, neither of us have read the books, so this is only based on like research that we've done, but it is cool to see that like this largely forgotten film, or at least at this point, like it is no longer the main adaptation of Lord of the Rings, had such a big inspiration on the big one that we all know and have seen.
Yeah, I don't know. Did you do any research on like the fans? I know that the critic response was kind of middling.
Oh, the fan response was vitriolic. They did not like this movie.
Yeah, which is even more interesting because, like we we're saying, the Peter Jackson films follow a very similar story to this. In fact, like watching this, it kind of feels like you're watching an animated version of the Peter Jackson films with,
Mhm.
with the technical issues notwithstanding. All the story beats are there. They got all the major plot points are laid out in this film from Fellowship and from Two Towers.
Well, interestingly, and we see this a lot today, but a lot of fans were mad that this film did not finish the story. They were mad that it ended where it did without being told, because the marketing, one of the taglines for this film was "See the whole story." And then the same thing just happened with Wicked this year. The tagline is also like, "Here's the whole
Oh, really?
story."
I mean, Dune did the same thing where the marketing for the Dune Part 1, they just called it Dune.
Yeah, yeah. And then like Across the Spider-Verse, people were mad at because of the way it cut off. But like at least we've become accustomed to like books being split up into two parts for movies, things like that. Back in 1978, when they advertised this as the full experience, Lord of the Rings fans were like, I can't believe they're gonna adapt all three of these books into a movie. And they were really, really mad that that was not the case.
Yeah, I mean, spoilers for anybody listening at home. These people never got to make the second one of these movies, so they did not do Return of the King in this style.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and I guess we'll just talk about this now. This movie was very profitable, which I was surprised by.
Shockingly.
Like, yeah, I mean, we'll talk about our feelings on this movie, but I had assumed, and also because no one really talks about this
That it
movie that
flopped,
often,
yeah.
yeah, I assumed it flopped, because it's weird and it's long and it doesn't do that much to get non-fans into the story, and then fans also hated it. But no, this made $32.6 million on a $4 million budget. So what's the quick math on that there?
It made its budget back
Made
for sure.
it made 8 times its budget. That's crazy. And then for the studios to say we're not going to do the second movie is such a choice. Like no studio would do that today. If you made 8 times your budget, you're getting fast tracked to a sequel. But I think this had production issues. Critics and fans both didn't like this. So the studio was like, we're just going to save ourselves a
Like,
headache.
we're out.
Yeah.
We're
We
good.
got the paycheck we wanted and we're going to use it for something else.
This is a decision that movie studios nowadays would never make.
Right.
If a movie made that much of its, like, past its budget and it was a well-known IP like Lord of the Rings, they're making more of them.
Yeah, yeah. But it's interesting. So this movie came out in 78. There was a Hobbit film by another company that came out a couple years before this. And then the rights for Lord of the Rings were given to this company. And then that company that made that Hobbit film earlier is the group that did the Return of the King animated film.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder, do you know when Tolkien died? I wonder if this was around the time that they were just starting to like send like feelers out for the adaptation
Yeah, so
rights for these books.
He died in 73.
Yeah.
So
No.
yeah, so his estate probably still didn't know how they wanted to manage.
I think his brother's name's not brother. His son's name is Christopher Tolkien, who took over the estate largely.
Yeah, and this estate, like, they've been able to make so much money off the backs of these books that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote.
Yeah, and that's what they did with Rings of Power too. For anybody that has watched the Rings of Power show on Amazon, and they're upset that it's not as direct of an adaptation from Tolkien's writings, it's largely the estate's fault because they pick and choose what companies are allowed to use in their adaptations. So they're like, no, we won't give you the Silmarillion. We'll give you the appendices of Lord of the Rings. That's all the second age stuff you can do. So they're stuck having to figure it out past then because there's like a bidding war for this Lord of the Rings show. One of the proposed Lord of the Rings shows that I think it was Netflix wanted to do was going to be a Gandalf and Aragorn series, basically. In this animated Lord of the Rings film, it goes a little bit deeper into the fact that when Gandalf discovers that Bilbo has a ring, he disappears, that there's a 17-year time gap
Yeah,
that they don't mention in the Jackson films. They kind of make it seem more like it's tighter.
I didn't realize that. Yeah, my memory of the Jackson films, which I also haven't seen in over a decade, is like Bilbo leaves his birthday party, and then Frodo gets the ring, and Gandalf's like, hey buddy, we got to go on a journey now.
Time to go.
But apparently, and this is book accurate, but what this movie does is Bilbo has his 111th birthday. He leaves. Frodo gets the ring, and then Frodo just stays there for 17
He just hangs
years.
out.
And then Gandalf leaves and comes back, which is such a weird story beat. I see why Peter Jackson changed it, because I don't know. I've read that part in the books. I don't remember it. I can't imagine that 17 years adds that much to that particular story.
But yeah, there was supposed to be a Netflix series centered around Gandalf and Aragorn trying to find Gollum, basically. That's the central crux of what he's trying to do in those 17 years. But that's what that series is going to be. The Tolkien estate said no. And so then they went to Amazon and Rings of Power happened. But there was a whole bidding war for the rights for these films. So yeah, it's interesting that they made an animated film of this in 1978 that it was profitable enough, definitely, to get a sequel, and that it didn't get a sequel.
Yeah, I can understand it, but I am so surprised by it. And it's a little unfortunate because, this movie definitely has some artistic merit, and I think I would like to have seen what they would have done to finish it. I'm probably not going to watch the other company's version of Return of the King, or maybe I will. Maybe we can talk about that the next time there's an animated Lord of the Rings movie in theaters.
Yeah, we're doing this episode because War of the Rohirrim is coming out, which is the origin story for Helm from Helm's Deep.
Yeah, so I'm glad we watched this one, which refreshed me on the Battle of Helm's Deep. Although, yeah, and we still haven't gotten into actually talking about this movie.
We haven't gotten into the most interesting thing to talk about with this movie.
The animation?
The quote animation style. So there are basically two styles of animation colliding in this movie. And at the beginning of the film, it's kind of just like regular hand-drawn animation. It looks pretty good, honestly, considering the budget and considering this is not made by Disney. It's not made by any sort of like big studio that I recognized. I'm actually not sure the guys that did this. I didn't recognize their names.
It was, so it's directed by Ralph Bakshi, who was like a legendary animator from, I want to say, the 50s and 60s. He made Fritz the Cat, which is like a raunchy cat cartoon, I think. It was distributed by United Artists, who, that's a studio.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see a United Artists film. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Amazon MGM bought them out this year. I forgot about that. It's very interesting to see who was involved with this. And then the way the animation turned out, like you said, 2D animation for the most part, at least initially. And then what's the other animation style?
Well, the thing about the beginning of the Lord of the Rings trilogy is that there's not as much action. It's a lot of people walking and talking, and there's some mystery stuff going on with the ring. They're trying to figure out what's going on. And then once you start getting into the ring race, then you're like, okay, there's motion going on.
Right.
There's a lot of extras. How are you going to animate all of that? And the solution they came up with was, we're going to kind of like halfway animate it, where we're going to take practical actors and practical sets and like rotoscope coloring over top of them to make it look animated. It's a weird effect. I can't think of another movie off the top of my head that looks like this.
Mm-hmm. The final product, you get this traditional looking 2D animation, and then it's cut, like just this live action footage is cut in, and the live action footage is colored, but then weirdly like distorted, filtered to kind of hide the fact that it's live action, except it doesn't hide it at all.
And then on top of that, they add in the animated assets, specifically the characters.
Mm-hmm.
By the time we get to the Battle of Helm's Deep, it's a bunch of practical orcs versus a bunch of practical people from Rohan, and then you have animated Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli just there. They stand out like if it's Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Now, I'm not sure, but I think most of the animation is what we call rotoscope. So even the traditional 2D animation look that we see is traditional 2D animation that's painted or drawn directly over live action actors. So I think they actually shot everything live action.
So everything's in camera, and then that's just like post-production work to make it animated.
Yeah, and then obviously they prioritized animating our important characters. And that's kind of why you can have scenes where, animated Legolas or Aragorn are swinging swords at the live action actors, and it kind of works. It's because that was,
It works enough.
Enough. So initially, and we were talking about this, we were trying to crack what we were seeing as we were watching it. Like
This movie is like jarring because it happens gradually over the course of the film.
it's
It
it's
gets
them
more
running out of money, and it's what you said. It's exactly what you said. Where the more fight scenes they do, the more they have to do the live action, and they can't do the full animation for it. But the first time they showed like it's all rotoscope, but from this point on, I'm going to be using rotoscope to describe just the vaguely animated live action people. The first time we see that is when they get to the prancing pony, and it cuts to a shot of the bar taverns, the patrons, just like cheering and dancing and stuff, and they were all live action people. And I was like, oh, these are the first humans we've seen. Maybe the men of the realm.
You thought it was like a creative
Creative
decision.
choice. Wouldn't that be cool? Like, okay, the hobbits are going to be little cartoon guys, and then the men will be live action guys, and the elves will be something else. And I was like, that's so cool. And then they just kept showing more of things, and I was like, okay, that's not what they're doing. When you're watching it, it begs the question of like, when was this done creatively, and when was it done out of necessity? And obviously, those things are not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, you almost ask the question, like, why is it animated? Why go through all this trouble when, like you said, they shot all of this? Why couldn't you have some sort of low budget live action Lord of the Rings film? Is it because if they had it just actually live action and you had to worry about sets and lighting and all the, the behind the scenes stuff that goes along with that, would the budget just be too high at that point? Was this the cheaper of the two options?
Yeah,
Or is this a studio mandate thing where they were only able to get the rights to do an animated film? I'm honestly not sure the answer to that question, but these are the kind of questions that come up when you're watching this film because it's legit baffling when you're watching it. You're like, what the hell happened? How did this become the result?
I found it jarring at first, and I thought I would get used to it, and I really didn't for like the
you never get
entire
used to it.
film. And I really want to like go to bat for it because ultimately they had problems to solve, and they solved them creatively, and I think that's great. But like, it just didn't really do it for me. Like, this is the type of weird stuff that, as like a film bro, I want to be like, it's so cool how they solved this problem and they made something that looks really visually interesting. But a lot of the solution involved just like throwing down a heavy filter on the action sequences and making it look a little bit ugly so that it was harder to like tell that it, they probably had cheap costumes. They were on maybe not even a soundstage. They might have just shot it like in a warehouse. I don't know. It just didn't end up looking very good, in my opinion. There are other people who would disagree. Like people, like if you read the Letterboxd reviews, people are like, "It's so trippy, it's so cool," and that feels like a real '70s animated movie. But that's not the style I grew up with.
And you were also saying that the live action actors who are ostensibly just stand-ins in this film, they were like not compensated or something
They
like
were
that.
they went uncredited. I'm sure they got paid like an hourly rate.
But they're not in the credits. The only people that are in the credits are the voice actors.
Yeah. Although I couldn't figure out if any of the voice actors were doing their own stage acting. There wasn't really, at least my cursory research, I couldn't find any information on like if Anthony Daniels was on set and saying the lines as he was playing Legolas.
Yeah. He had a big couple of years there between 77 and 78.
To be in Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, is he the only actor? No, Christopher Lee has been in Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Are those the only two?
I'm sure there's more. I'd have to go through like all the cast lists, especially with all the extended Star Wars stuff that they've had now.
That's true. That's true. But you're right. That guy had this massive nerd career for a hot second. I mean, obviously he still does. He'll never stop being C-3PO. Disney probably pays him money every year to do nothing.
Anthony Daniels' job now is to go to any Star Wars event that he's told to go to.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. What did you think of the animation style?
I really like the 2D animation style. I really wish that they could have figured out a way to just keep that through the entire film because I think it would have legitimately affected how I ultimately felt about the movie. I think I gave it like a 2.5 out of 5.
Yeah.
On my Letterboxd, which the Lord of the Rings movies are 5 out of 5 films for me. Which me, I'm a stickler with my film reviews. I think they're near perfect movies.
Yeah.
And obviously, the visuals are not the only aspect of the film. I think there's other elements of this movie that are lackluster in comparison to Peter Jackson's films. By the end of the movie, it's just a live action film. It's a bad live action adaptation of Lord of the Rings with this like color swatched over top of it, and it's distracting.
Yeah, yeah. So that mix of animation styles, which some people again do like, it didn't really do the trick for us. Yeah, the other main aspect that you found really lackluster, I remember because you brought it up as soon as the film started, and then you said it again throughout the film, and then one more time when the film ended, was the musical score.
Yeah, it's just not good in comparison.
Now, it's interesting that you say that because you know who else didn't like the musical score for this? Ralph Bakshi, the director. I believe he wanted Led Zeppelin to do an album for the Lord of the Rings movie.
That would have been fucking awesome.
That would have made it like if Led Zeppelin had done the soundtrack to this, I think the shitty animation would be forgivable. Like I think you would look at that
If
and
the
be like,
background music was more rock and roll, I'd be like, shit, at least they tried something.
yeah, it would be like you know, the Take On Me music video. You're like, oh, this is all creative and intentional and it looks great. There is so many things that
It's like
Bakshi wanted
it's
that
like the
just
David
didn't
Lynch
happen.
the David Lynch Dune movie. The soundtrack is done by Toto.
Yeah, that's right. And that's one of the better parts of that movie.
Yeah, you remember that soundtrack.
Yeah, you can go back and watch our episode on it. I'm sure we bring it up. I don't really know the specifics, but I know that Bakshi constantly was not getting what he wanted to make this movie. So he wanted to be able to draw over all of those action scenes and make those orcs 2D animated, like the main characters were, and just budgetary constraints and then technology.
Yeah, that's what it almost seems like, is that they hit a point where they kind of just ran out of money and they went, we just got to ship it.
Yeah.
We don't have the money to finish what you want to finish here. This is the best we got.
Yeah, and not only that, he initially just wanted this to be like a 3-hour long movie that covered all of the books, and the studio said no, so they split it into two, and I think that makes sense.
Yeah, which is interesting because this movie covers Fellowship and Two Towers. It's like 2 hours and 10 minutes long. The Fellowship part of the movie is the first 90 minutes.
Yeah, it's a full movie of Fellowship, and then they tack on another
And then they speed run through Two
45
Towers.
minutes of Two Towers. Yeah, they show the Ents once.
They show the Ents once, and then we don't see Merry and Pippin again.
Yeah, aren't Merry and Pippin at the Battle of Helm's Deep?
No, they're not. No, they lead. They're part of the Ent uprising that goes to Isengard and destroys Isengard while the Battle of Helm's Deep's happening.
Okay, okay.
So that's when the rest of the Fellowship gets back to Isengard. It's like destroyed. And they're like, "What the hell happened here?" And that's when Merry and Pippin are there. They're eating their salted pork.
Okay. I gotta watch.
Salted pork.
Yeah, the pacing of it's really interesting because I would say overall it's paced fairly well, but then by those last 45 minutes, you're almost like, I don't know, they kind of started another movie on me while I was ready for this one to be over. You know, I think the parts that they choose to skip over are correct parts, and that's why, you know, they skip over Tom Bombadil. Peter Jackson does the same thing. Like, they did a good job choosing where to make their cuts to make this shorter. So the pacing's good initially, and then just the fact that they tack on 75% of another book makes it not as good.
It is funny that they were like, okay, what parts of Two Towers do we need to put in this movie? Let's just do Helm's Deep.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
They go to Rohan for like 10 minutes, and they rescue Theoden from Grima Wormtongue, and then kick him out, and then Aragorn's like, Theoden, we have to go to Helm's Deep. And he's like, yeah, sounds good, Aragorn. And then they're out immediately.
It cuts right to them going. There's a lot of scenes where it just made these hard cuts. I remember one thing I said as we were watching it is, are we watching like the TV cut of this? Are they cutting for commercial breaks?
There's some fade to blacks that we saw in the HBO Max version that we watched.
And I still don't know. It's still entirely possible that there was commercial cuts in the version that we watched, and I'll never know.
Also, all those scenes when they first get to Rohan is indicative of another interesting thing, interesting change, is that Eowyn has no speaking lines, despite the fact that we see her. And I realized throughout the course of the film, there's only one female character with speaking lines in the entire movie, and that's Galadriel.
Yeah.
And even Galadriel's role is...
She has one scene.
She has one scene, basically. It's the scene where she's talking to Frodo at the pensive. I don't know what's called with Lord of the Rings.
The pensive is a good word.
It's a pensive. Yeah. And That's it. She doesn't even get the voiceover at the beginning when they're talking about how Sauron was defeated by Isildur. And
Well, I'm sure she doesn't get the voiceover at the beginning of Lord of the Rings either. It was Peter Jackson who came up with that creative choice
he was
later.
like, Kate Blanchett? Yes, please.
I have her on. I'm paying for Kate Blanchett. Please, we need to have her do more.
And then also Arwen is just not in this
in the
movie at
movie.
all. So I guess Aragorn doesn't get his love interest.
Maybe she would have shown up in the third one, or the second one rather. Who knows?
So instead, when the ring wraiths get destroyed by the tidal wave, that's just Frodo that does it with the ring.
Yeah, I forgot.
We watched this movie 2 days ago.
Whatever. I will say that the weird animation did work for making the ring wraiths really creepy. I think if you are someone who likes like old school scary animation, there's a lot you're gonna like in this movie.
Yeah, some nightmare fuel.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet if we had talked to like children of the 80s, they would be like, oh yeah, the thing that scared me when I was a kid, the ring wraith scenes in Lord of the Rings. Yeah, they're freaky. That was like one of the the most redeeming moments of the film for me, was seeing how scary those ring wraiths were. Like, they're scary in the Peter Jackson films too, but I think they're even scarier here because it's so unnerving, because at least initially most of what you see is the 2D hobbits, and they're very cartoony and kid friendly, and then you just see real men in these scary costumes doing scary things.
Another big thing that I think this film suffers from is that because they're trying to do so much in so little time, and obviously they had budget constraints, is that they don't have enough time to build up the world of Middle Earth. And the world building is one of the best parts of watching the Lord of the Rings franchise, is that you get to see these sprawling, fields and these monuments and these forests, and it feels like you're actually being transported to another world entirely. In reality, you're being transported to New Zealand. But in this movie, there's like a lack of establishing shots, which I find jarring. You'll see characters walking, and there's just a hard cut, and then they're in a new location talking to people.
It's bizarre too, because they painted these beautiful
the masks, they look
backgrounds.
good.
All you had to do was just shoot one of them.
Do a zoom.
Yeah,
Do a zoom to your mat.
And then, yeah, but they didn't. They did so many hard cuts. And again, maybe we watched the TV cut, but I don't think so.
I don't think so. When they're fighting the orcs in the Mines of Moria, it's like 10 orcs they're fighting against.
Yeah.
And it's just like silly. When you watch it in the Peter Jackson film, it feels like they're like swarming the room.
Yeah.
And they're overwhelming the Fellowship.
Yeah, I played this Lord of the Rings video game for the PS2. I think it was called Two Towers, but I feel like the Mines of Moria were in it, so maybe it wasn't. But I died on that level so many times because the orcs just keep coming.
Yeah, the Two Towers game is iconic with the Helm's Deep level.
Is the Mines of Moria in it?
I think it might all just be one game. I
think you're right. I think they might adapt like most of the action of Fellowship and then the Battle of Helm's Deep.
Yeah, if we're talking about Lord of the Rings video games, real quick, the Shadow of Mordor games, for anybody that hasn't played them, they're fucking awesome. They're really good. I played them both over COVID.
Yeah.
They were COVID games for me, and they're a lot of fun. You play as this guy who dies and gets resurrected, and he has the ghost of Celebrimbor inside of him, who is the elven smith that created the One Ring with Sauron, and he's trying to get revenge on Sauron while being a ghost inside your body.
Yeah.
It's really cool. It's a really cool game, and you're basically working your way through legions of orcs that have their own like seniority system. So you're killing like the lower level orcs, and then you work your way up to like the lieutenants and then the generals. And they have this nemesis system in the game where sometimes you'll kill a lieutenant orc and he's not actually dead, and he'll pop up later in the game, and it's completely randomized. These are guys that are different every playthrough that will just be like your rival throughout the game.
Yeah, that's
or like
cool.
if you cut a guy's arm off in animation, next time you see him, he won't have that arm, but he's pissed at you and he's leveled up.
Yeah, and I think the other cool thing about that game is like there's no reused dialogues. So anytime you sneak up on your enemies, they're always chit-chatting because they're just dudes doing their job, and they're always saying something different that's a little silly but makes it feel real. So it's just more good world building and making these orcs feel like fleshed out creatures with their own desires that your character snuffs out. It's neat. Yeah, I've only ever played Shadows of Mordor once. I was going to visit a friend of mine and it felt very much like we were kids, taking turns playing a game.
Yeah, and Shadow of War does the cool thing where it takes the foundation of the first game and turns it into kind of like a tower defense type of deal, where you are like flying around the map, going to different battles while also trying to defend a point and then trying to take out the enemy's other side. It's cool. It's cool stuff. Definitely recommend trying those games.
And now, what era of Lord of the Rings is this set in? Is this pre-Lord of the Rings?
I think this would have to be Second Age, right? This would be before he was originally defeated by the armies of men and elves.
Right.
But it's after Celebrimbor dies, so it's somewhere along in there. But it's before the Third Age, which is when Lord of the Rings takes place.
I see. Yeah, this movie, I don't really know what else there is to say about it. It's just like, it's a relatively faithful adaptation, although if you asked Lord of the Rings fans in the 70s, they would disagree with you. But it's just not a very good adaptation.
I mean, Lord of the Rings is a nightmare adaptation in general for anybody. It's a nightmare adaptation for Peter Jackson because it's one of those fandoms where there's so much detail, there's so much lore that there's no shot that you're going to get everything right or you're going to get everything into the movie the exact way that the fans want to see it. So some section of fans are always going to be mad at you. And I think that's what makes the Peter Jackson film so good, is that they're just good movies. And it's something I've been saying about like Star Wars for forever now, is that it doesn't matter if you're doing callbacks to the 70s and 80s or you're doing, whatever DEI initiative they're trying to go for, or whatever like political statement they're trying, just like make a good movie. If you make a good movie, like none of this shit matters. I was seeing reviews of the Skeleton Crew television series that came out last week, and people were like, "Oh, it's Space Goonies," and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
That's all you need. It's amazing how simple it is.
Yeah.
You break it down like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting. Like, I'm sure they tried their damnedest to make a good movie, and they put a lot of time and money into it. They got good talent. It's just maybe they were too ambitious in their goals, and that's really what came back to bite them. Yeah, let's look at the ratings on this thing.
Yeah, I'm actually curious about the ratings. This is something I haven't really looked too hard into. I was so surprised by doing like my initial research and being like, "Whoa, this movie made money! Like
a lot of money.
That's crazy."
So it's got a 3.2 on Letterboxd, which is quite average. It's like just above your average rating.
Yeah, I'd say it's higher than expected.
Yeah, and then it's got a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes.
That sounds closer to what I would think of it.
So at a 3.2 though, because that's like the general audience score mixed with a lot of like film bros and stuff, it's an interesting rating. It's higher than what both of us gave it. You gave it a 2.5. I gave it a 3.
So the argument for the movie being underrated, I think, is pretty simple in that this movie may not be the greatest movie in the world, but that doesn't matter because it inspired 3 of the greatest movies ever made. And Peter Jackson loved this movie, and he took a lot of key elements. I mean, if anything, you can think of the 1978 Lord of the Rings film as just one giant storyboard for the Peter Jackson films. I'm sure if you put these films side by side with each other, there are a ton of shots that are like super similar to the Peter Jackson movies. And I'm sure that's not by accident. I'm sure he looked at them and went, "Yep, that seems good. We're just going to go along with that." In that respect, I think it's kind of cool
Sure.
that Peter Jackson looked at this stuff, and the people, obviously, Peter Jackson didn't make the movie in a vacuum. There's a whole legion of people that worked on those films, and this movie came out 20 years before the Lord of the Rings movies, and so I'm sure a lot of those people were probably kids when they watched the animated Lord of the Rings film, and they were like, "This is neat. I'm going to take some elements of this and maybe try to put it in this, this big boy Lord of the Rings film that I'm doing." So in that respect, I think the animated film is a little underrated, and it's definitely a film that, because there's so much overlap between the Jackson films, I feel like it's definitely a recommend from me to watch it because of that. Quality or not quality, I'm not here arguing that the movie is good or anything like that. But in retrospect, I would say, yeah, it's a little underrated in that respect. It seems like the guys that made this movie, they got a lot right. They were severely hampered by budgetary and technological limitations here. If they were making this movie today, I think you could make a fucking banger animated Lord of the Rings movie today.
Yeah, and we'll see something similar with War of the Rohirrim.
Yeah, War of the Rohirrim's interesting,
which I think
it's
kind
kind
of
of
looks like a banger.
it's kind of like an anime style they went with, which is interesting. So I mean, I'm definitely gonna see it when it's in theaters.
Yeah, me too. It's interesting, and this isn't related to over or under, but something that you said, it's been about between Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, 2001, and today. That's the same amount of time as between the 78 movie and the 2000.
It makes you feel old, right?
It does.
Because we were kids when the Lord of the Rings films
It makes
came
me
out.
feel, yeah, because you would think that the gap between that 78 movie and the 2001 movie was this massive gap in time. And I guess, what is it, 23 years or something? That's a pretty long time. But still, like, I couldn't fathom them trying to make another direct adaptation of Lord of the Rings today. That'd be crazy.
They're making another adaptation of Harry Potter today.
Yeah, and we literally were making fun of that today, weren't we? Or was that just on Twitter? We were talking about it.
Everybody's making fun of it.
Yeah. It's not.
They're starting to slowly come out with the casting announcements. There's some interesting ones.
Yeah,
but
whatever.
we're not going to talk about that show on the pod ever.
No. So it's my turn now to talk about why this is overrated.
Yeah, why is Lord of the Rings 1978 overrated?
I mean, you can hear the exhaustion in our voices as we discuss the animation, the music, the pacing. Almost every component of this just did not do the trick for us. And this is one of Dylan's favorite stories of all time, is this Lord of the Rings. And to see it done in a way that just like fails to really capture the imagination, disappointing. I think that a 3.2 is a little bit, it's like a smidge too high.
Yeah, if we're going off 3.2, it's high.
Yeah, it's I think there is artistic value in here. Like I said, I think that a lot of people definitely look back on this as a formative film for them. It wasn't for us, but I know that my older cousin had a big poster of this. I'll say the poster slaps hard. The one with Gandalf, and he's like monumental and looking down on Sam and Frodo, and he's got the big sword. It's a really iconic poster. And then even that kind of outdoes the good parts of the animation that we actually like. Like, it doesn't live up to the promise of the poster. It's just a little disappointing on every level, and then very disappointing on like some of the weird animation level and the fighting, which is important for Lord of the Rings. That I really can't say that this is underrated. Like, I want to go to bat for this because I thought it was a forgotten flop cult classic, but it wasn't. It was a very successful movie. This movie made more money than maybe, I won't say it made more money than it deserved, right? Like, people wanted to see this and they saw it. That's really great. But like, I kind of thought of this as like a failed movie, but it wasn't a failure. It just failed to launch a franchise right away because it was bad.
Yeah, this may be the most legitimately confounding film that we've done on the pod so far, because yes, it was successful at the box office. Fans of the franchise hated the movie. Critics did not like the movie, and then it ultimately did not get a sequel.
It just couldn't even get like a direct to VHS sequel. Like,
and then 20 years later, another guy comes around, does a live action version, and they're the greatest fantasy films ever made.
Yeah.
Which is that's the big knock on this movie, is that I would say that this is like almost literally as bad of a movie as you could make with this source material, given that it is so similar to the Jackson films.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's
when you're like, this is the exact same story, and it just does not work somehow.
Yeah,
despite the fact that it's the same material.
I think it really, like most movies we watch, even bad movies, I'll still think about it like for a day or two later, and I'll be like, that was fun, or that was interesting, or even that was bad. This movie, I just kind of forgot. Even the sequences that I thought were visually interesting and cool, I like have not looked back on it at all because I didn't care enough to. I think if I saw this movie as a kid, I'd have a whole different tune. I'd be like, it's so invigorating when they encounter the ring wraiths for the first time. It's so cool. But watching this for the first time as an adult,
yeah, the bad animation wouldn't stand out to you.
Yeah, not as much.
It would probably, because
you'd be like, whoa, that's weird. That's
kids
cool.
have better imagination. You just
fill in the gaps. Yeah. But yeah, and then like you said, the lack of the world building, like they do have sequences that's just the Fellowship running, but it looks silly. And it's just, They're not making full use of those beautiful backgrounds that we do see. Like, even the really good elements of this movie are not used to their full effect. So it's like, I can't really find things to go to bat for in this movie itself. And then in terms of its legacy, like, yeah, you're right. It inspired a better series of films. I don't think that means it's underrated.
Which makes this movie wholly irrelevant at this point. It's obsolete.
Yeah, I think there's value in watching this, seeing the problem solving, even if it didn't solve every problem. It's cool to see. I mean, first of all, you'd never see a film released like this today. No studio would.
Yeah, this would be a tax write-off.
Yeah, they would not allow this movie to be put out because it just feels like an incomplete movie. The fact that it was put out and we get to see it, that is kind of cool.
It's a fucking miracle.
Yeah. The fact that it made money is insane. But
Yeah.
the fact that we get to like have it as a piece of like
The fact that it's on
here's how
HBO
movies are
Max
made,
that we can easily access.
it's kind of neat. But none of that makes it an underrated film.
Unfortunately,
Yeah. So that's my piece on this.
I think it's definitely overrated, and it's unfortunate that the Peter Jackson films exist and just completely drink this film's milkshake. It's the Peter Jackson films are better in every way.
Yeah.
They just are.
Yeah, it's overrated, and I think that this does kind of get credited as like a cult classic movie when I don't really think it deserves that. It really is just like, if you want to watch a good Lord of the Rings film, just watch the quote-unquote new ones.
I mean, I would put it in a similar vein as the David Lynch Dune movie, where I think it's pretty clear at this point that the Villeneuve version of Dune is a lot better quality-wise. The Lynch film, it's doing some weird 80s stuff, and he's trying some different things. But ultimately, I think that film doesn't work nearly as well as the Villeneuve ones.
Yeah.
At taking what is on the page and bringing it to screen.
Yeah.
And I think the 78 Lord of the Rings is similar. It's a good first attempt at adapting the source material, and it was later improved by a better filmmaker.
Yeah. I wonder, here's a question. Do you think there's any like bad movie adaptation that's the first like of recent years that you think will get a much better remake 20 years from now?
Something like kind of flopped.
Yeah. It's hard because
I don't know, Divergent.
right, that's what I was thinking. That also didn't get to have its last book.
They were gonna do a TV show, and then they never got to do the TV show.
But like, here's the thing about Divergent, and no shade to the author of Divergent, but like those books aren't good, so you can't make a good adaptation 20 years from now.
Something is a
Source
good
material's good, the adaptation is
bad adaptation.
bad, and then but there could be a good version 20 years from now. Yeah,
it's tough to say. I mean, I don't know. Anything in DC?
got him.
I heard Creature Commandos is reviewing very well, so
I would say maybe The Giver, which like kind of was marketed as like the type of
you know what my answer is going to be? It's a book that I really liked when I was a kid that had a movie come out, and the movie sucks. And it's Ender's Game.
Oh yeah, Ender's Game.
I think
no, that's the perfect example.
Yeah, you can make a legitimately good Ender's Game movie.
Of course,
I believe that 110%. The movie adaptation they did with was it Asa Butterfield and Harrison Ford? It's not good. And I think they miss a lot of the main points that make the book interesting. With the kids and the battle school and stuff like that, you can make a cool adaptation.
Yeah,
of Ender's Game.
That's the perfect answer. Also, Chronicles of Narnia is trying to do it right now. We've got Greta Gerwig directing some Narnia films that are coming out. Even though they were successful, they had 3 of their 7 books completed as films. But yeah, the back 2 were kind of bad. But yeah.
Check out Lord of the Rings 1978. It's on HBO Max.
Yeah, it's fine.
If you wanna take drugs beforehand, I feel like this would be a good movie to take drugs before watching.
It's definitely a good one. And like, I don't really like doing this in our house, but like putting on a movie and like making fun of it, I like, especially if I haven't seen it, I'm like, I don't really need the commentary, guys. Let's just watch the movie and then we could talk about it. But like this one, I think you can like make fun of throughout.
I'm somebody that I kind of hate talking during movies.
Yeah.
Because I like to pay attention to what I'm watching. This movie, you can't do that.
Yeah, this is the perfect.
Because every scene, you're like, what is happening?
You and your friends can Mystery Science Theater
making?
this one like as much as you want. And that's probably the best way to watch it.
Yeah. But anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of the Over Under Movies podcast. Thanks again, everyone, for listening or watching if you're checking us out on YouTube. We release new episodes every Monday on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Pods, wherever you get your podcasts. If you're a member of our Patreon, you get episodes a day early. That is all paid tiers of our Patreon. I think the lowest one is like $2 a month or something like that. It's the holiday season. Hit us up on Patreon. Be a good citizen. Get your name at the end of the credits. All that good stuff. You can also join our Discord server where we talk about movies, and we have a Letterboxd bot integration where anytime we review a movie, it goes into a little channel there, so you can see exactly what we're watching before we do pods on it. So you kind of get a leg up on what the next episodes are going to be. End of the year's coming up. We're going to be doing our end of the year lists. We got some interesting stuff coming up. It's gonna be fun. Yeah, I'm excited. It's crazy that 2025 is like a few weeks away here.
I think we're gonna have really different end of the year lists, because remember last year we had like 3 of the same movies on our list.
I think we're gonna. I do think this year we're gonna have very different lists. I was like quickly writing down the movies that I liked so far this year. I got some catching up to do. There's films that I haven't seen that I know that I need to see. But
me too.
I think I might have like 3 horror movies in my top 5.
I don't think I have. Well, no, I might have some.
We're recording this before seeing Nosferatu, which is a decent chance of breaking into my top 5.
Yeah, I've heard really good things. Yeah, I think that's going to be a treat. Talking about, and I haven't done any research on what's coming out next year, but obviously that's going to be either the start of our new year, or both our end of the year list and the start of our, and the looking forward to movies in 2025 list will be the first 2 episodes of 2025. Yeah,
sounds good. Anyway, thanks again for watching, guys. We will see you at the movies later.
Peace.